I've often thought about kind of doing something I call behind the pulpit, maybe beyond the pulpit. I think behind, kind of giving a glimpse into what happens from this stage. People come in, the worship, the service, the feeling of it, the energy changes when people are in the room. And then there's a concept that I'm trying to share. And then if I almost took a look at the film, the game tape, and thought about how well did I play, or how well did I perform, or did I get across what God wanted me to get across? And can we go a little bit deeper? And when I look at what happened on Sunday versus my thoughts today on a Monday or on a Tuesday, I think about the depth of what I didn't get into. And I certainly am going to pick it up on Sunday. But just quickly, I wanted to get into Gideon because my ultimate aim was to get into this idea of being a part of the fight. And the fact that there's a call of God on your life and there's something for you to do. The Midianites are an enemy that's impoverishing the people. So whether you belong to God, certainly we're saying we're God's people, but whatever group you belong to, I know it was the Sunday before MLK's birthday, so I kind of made it focus a little bit on African-American people, but it can apply to anyone. That you have to see yourself as a part of a people. You belong to God, you belong to a people, and that you have to have a responsibility to your people and an awareness of your people. And that ultimately, what do you do when not just you're failing or you're not experiencing success or you're not seeing everything that you want to see, but your people aren't either? I know it's easy to be frustrated with your group if you decide to be a part of it. On Sunday, I got way into how we want to experience the freedoms of the individual, and I got so caught up in it, I feel like I didn't really make the point. And that is, you need to identify with a people. Number one, you belong to God. Number two, you belong to a people. And that you notice what's going on with your people. Isaiah says, "Woe is me, for I am undone. I'm a man of unclean lips, and I live amongst the people of unclean lips, and my eyes have seen the King." So it's not just an awareness of me and whether or not I have a job, or whether or not I have money, or whether or not I own my own property, or whether or not I'm being robbed or abused or kept out by a system or by a group or the enemy, but it's my people are out. And what do you do when you come to that understanding and you don't see hope? Because what happens in Gideon is the Lord appears and says, yeah, I sent prophets and you didn't listen. So then what do you do when your people don't listen? What are the next steps? If I come to a place where I realize my people are not listening, I certainly can feel this way. My people are not listening. Now I have to cry out to God. It's why we're consecrating. It's why we're fasting. So we can cry out to God for God's intervention so that he can lead us into victory. And that's where I was headed. I barely got there, but that's where I was headed. In not just looking at the children of Israel just for the children of Israel's sake. That's something we do in church, is we just kind of look at it just for the sake of having an understanding of it biblically. And it's almost meant to make us be jealous of God's people or look at their culture as if it's some kind of special eternal culture that it's God's, instead of realizing that we're looking at God dealing with a people. And then to say, okay, how does God's working apply to my people? How does it apply to my family? How does it apply to my situation? And how do I get God to intervene on my behalf? How do I get the intervention of God? How do I get divine intervention? It's what we're looking for. And then that Judges chapter 6 starts with the intervention of God. It starts with an angel coming down. It starts with Gideon in a wine press threshing wheat because he's got to hide his food. He's got to hide the thing that sustains him. And I don't know if you can relate to that, but I can. Where we feel like we can't trust everybody with the stuff that sustains us. Or we have to be careful about what we really think. Or careful about what really brings us life. We want to have integrity, but not necessarily have honesty. And we want to be able to keep secret what really is bringing us strength. Even in being a Christian, it's almost like I don't want to be too out loud about it because there's a life it brings to me. I don't live on bread alone, but on every word that proceeds from the mouth of God. But I'm kind of threshing it in a wine press because I'm afraid if I'm too bold about it, then the powers that be will rob me of it. The angel shows up and divine intervention happens. And that's what we're looking for. And it's why we're praying. And then I meant to, and I think I'm going to get into this Sunday, but if you're watching this, I'll give you a preview of it in which I talked about how divine intervention happens. And it starts, number one, with God shows up in the place. So the angel shows up right in the middle of their situation because it's hard to have divine intervention if you're not in the place you're supposed to be. Very often, the way we are made to move off of a place is because we ain't supposed to be there. We're not supposed to be there. We can't ask God to co-sign his name to mess. So sometimes God allows trouble and upheaval and turmoil to happen just to get you to move to another place. And so the angel of the Lord shows up because this is the place where they're supposed to be. And the problem isn't the place, the problem is the idolatry. So number one, it starts with the angel showing up. And then when the angel comes there, the angel in essence says to Gideon, he speaks to Gideon and he says to him, hey, you got it going on, mighty warrior. So it starts with this place of God, and then it goes into a word from God that really is empowering you. And so divine intervention happens because you're already working. You're already on a path. You are already resisting the negative. You are already on the battlefield. Gideon is in a winepress threshing wheat to hide it from the Midianites who want to take everything from them. So he's already bold, but he doesn't feel like he's bold. And God's speaking to him and saying, you're a mighty warrior, meaning this that you're doing here is a sign of greater that you're about to do. And that divine intervention starts with you starting by doing the small, the beginning of knowing what you know to do. But then Gideon gets honest. And he says, well, if the Lord is with us, then why are we in this situation? Why have we been turned over to the hands of the Midianites? Why are we so impoverished if God is with us? And I think it's another way in which divine intervention happens. It happens as a result of an honest assessment of the facts. It's hard for God to intervene in a place where you're not honest with yourself. We might look at that and say, oh, Gideon's not saying the right thing, but he's honestly assessing where they are. Not just where he is, but where they are as a people. He's honestly assessing where his nation is. He honestly has a pretty clear grasp of what's been going on for the last 3 to 5 to 7 years. I don't know how well God can intervene if you weren't honest about what he did 5 years ago, if you're not honest about where you were 10 years ago. How can he intervene if you are self-deceived? And the Lord speaks to him and says, yeah, I want you to go in the strength that you have. So the other part of the divine intervention is gathering your strength, pulling your courage together, understanding that there's something that God has put in your hands, that you're stronger than you think you are, and that you need to figure out, well, what strength do I actually have? Although Gideon speaks very humbly and says, my clan is the least in Manasseh, and I'm the least in the family, to know that God sees you greater, and then for God to remind you there's a strength that you have that you don't know, and you're going to go in the strength God gave you. And it may not seem a lot, but it's yielded. And that the intervention of God happens with yielded vessels that are able to assess honestly where they are, and then to be humble enough to say, I don't have much, but with God in it, it becomes a whole lot. And then Gideon believes. And a part of how he believes is by testing whether or not this is God. And I don't know if we talk enough honestly about that. We hear from people that talk a lot about faith without acknowledging that there's a testing of the faith, and there's a stepping out on it, and there's a, does it bear my weight? And there's a, and what he says is, don't move. If this really is you, if this really is God, don't go anywhere, because I'm going to go and I'm going to come back with an offering. And so there's a proactive move. There's an act of faith. There is a sacrifice that inspires this divine intervention, because the sacrifice is an expectation of greater. If you are struggling for food, you don't give up food. But for you to go grab what food you got and lay that at the feet of this angel, this divine interventive moment, and for the food to disappear, and for the angel to disappear, and for Gideon to say, whoa, I had an encounter with God, I wasn't aware of it. This faith is what activates this divine intervention. That's what I wanted to say on Sunday. And I'm going to say it. For us to realize we belong to God. We belong to a people, a connection. I'm talking about it all year, that we belong to a land. The land owns us. We own it, but it owns us. That we belong to this call, this counsel of God. And then I belong to myself. That's where we're going, 2024. And I think I'm going to do this behind the pulpit thing and just kind of share where I was and what I was thinking, and give you a glimpse into my thought process and into my mind. Maybe even share some stuff that I wanted to say but didn't want to say because it was Sunday, or I don't do a lot of that. But maybe me being honest about what my mind was really thinking in that moment, something I want to do. So, hey, it's going to be here. And if you're interested in my process, if you're interested in kind of where my thought was, if you're interested even in how I present a concept, this might be a place for you to be. And I'm going to post them and see what happens. So thanks for listening. See you this Sunday. This Sunday, I'm going to pick it back up, talking about belonging to God and answering this call of God on Gideon, and us realizing how we need to mobilize our forces. It's going to be powerful. Can't wait to see you.